We've started running these webinars last Thursday in response to the responses that you all gave us to the survey that we've been sending out, just to kind of capture what are the issues that you're facing during this current time. So a lot of the responses demonstrated that actually a lot of members are struggling with funding at the moment, so that's kind of a focus for a lot of our webinars at this time. So today's session is all about writing and evidencing bids. So just initially a bit of quick housekeeping. You are all muted and all your videos are off, so no one can see you or hear you. You should see at the bottom or the top of your screen a couple of functions. There's a Q&A. So if you're having any technical issues, or do you want to submit any questions relevant to the session, this is the kind of app or the function that you use for that. There's also a chat function, so if you just want to share additional ideas or resources during the session, any links, then you can just pop them in there. We will be monitoring Sophie will be monitoring the Q&A, but we won't necessarily be monitoring the chat during the session. So if there's anything urgent that you need us to address, please do put it in the Q&A section. We are hang on.
I just wanted to say that we have Heidi as well. So Heidi's come in and she's going to be helping us with the Q&A as well, just because at some point probably Alice and I are both going to be talking and we don't want to miss your questions. So thanks to Heidi, she's going to be joining us too.
We are recording the webinar, so it will be available online afterwards. So if any of your colleagues have missed it, you can share it with them. And if you leave the webinar unintentionally, you can just use the same link, click on that, and it'll just bring you straight back in again. Okay, so writing and evidencing your bid. It's going to be myself and Sophie delivering today's session. So I'm just going to let Sophie introduce herself quickly.
Yeah, hello. So I'm Sophie. I've worked for Social Farms and Gardens for about 5 years now, I think it is. And my background is running a community garden. So I did that for about 12 years in total, so I've got quite a lot of experience through that in writing bids. I've also worked for various small charities and I've done various bits of sort of bid writing for them. In my time at Social Farms and Gardens, I've also written quite a few bids of varying scales, I suppose. I guess I've written, applications for like £300. I've also written applications or been part of applications for, I guess, £300,000. I think the biggest one that we worked on, which unfortunately wasn't successful, was for over £1 million. So yeah, I've got a fairly broad range of experience now, and have also been speaking to, in the course of putting these webinars together, speaking to at least one funder in the namely the National Lottery. So I've got a bit of an idea of where they're at the moment as well. So hope to share some of that with you today. Thanks.
Thanks, Sophie. And then I'll just be supporting Sophie in delivering today's session. So my name's Alison. I've also worked for Social Farms and Gardens for around 5 years. And in that time been specifically looking at kind of alternative sources of funding. So which is really kind of required understanding what different funders or different supporters' priorities might be. So I think that's where my background comes from. Also written bids for other community groups, particularly in youth work and community development more recently. So that's kind of where my background comes from. So I'm going to hand over to Sophie to kick off, and we'll get going.
Great, thank you. So yeah, we're just going to take you through a few sort of slides and really just sort of talk through what are our kind of bits of advice and top tips in terms of actually writing your bid. If this is the first of these webinars that you've come on, we have also done some sessions on putting together a budget and actually looking for and finding and approaching funders. So they will be available soon online as well. But for this one, we're just going to be talking about the actual sort of bid content. And the first thing I want to kind of go through, I mean, if we could summarize the entire presentation in 3 words, it probably would be read the guidance. So that is absolutely critical. And when we say read the guidance, don't do what I'm completely guilty of in terms of like flicking through it and going, yeah, that sounds like us, brilliant, let's go for it, because you're really excited about your idea and the things that you want funding. actually read it in detail and then probably read it again. So, I mean, Alison found this statistic incredibly, that around about a third of applications to charitable trusts are ineligible. So don't be that third of applications, because that represents a massive waste of your very valuable time. So have a look for things like the kind of size organisations that they're looking to fund. Are you the right size? Are you in the right location? Some funders will fund nationally, some are looking at very specific geographic locations. Do you have the right organisational structure? Most funders don't only fund charities these days, but some still do. So do you have the right legal structure? Is your turnover too small or too great? All of that will be in the guidance, so do look at that. Are you eligible in other ways? Or is your project eligible? So are you looking to work with the kind of beneficiaries that they're looking to support through their funds? How much money do you need? Does that fit into their sort of funding pot? And what kind of time frame are you looking to deliver over? So some funders will want you to deliver everything within the next 6 months. That's not uncommon, but equally some might be looking sort of several years ahead, and their decision making time frame might be, you know, similarly kind of long. Other things to bear in mind in terms of eligibility are just some things like, do you have a bank account? Do you have a constitution? Do you have, if you do have a bank account, is it unrelated people who can sign those checks? All of those things are things that funders might want to check. So just before you get into ever writing down your bid, just making sure that you are eligible to apply in the first place. Also useful to go through up front is what kind of evidence are they asking to see. So we're going to talk about evidencing your impact in a little while, but they also might want to see organisational documents. So we'll talk a little bit about those, but things like accounts and bank statements, for example. So just making sure that you have all of that evidence to hand, so that you don't have to frantically email colleagues, ring people, search through online files at 10 to the deadline on submission day, which I have done. So don't do that, it's not fun. And then also just check how the application needs to be submitted. Is it an online document? Does it, I mean, very few are postal now, but some small trusts do take postal applications. So do you need to take into account postage times? If you're emailing it, do you need to get a colleague to do that? You know, just consider all of those things. And then other things that you might want to think about in terms of research before you start actually putting your bid together. It's really worth checking out the funder, and so maybe even having a look at through the Charities Commission website, having a look at their annual reports, their accounts. That's going to give you a really good indication of how much money they might spend or give away each year, what some of their funding priorities are, yeah, and just give you a bit of a better view of that organisation. You might be able to talk to other people who have had grants from that organisation, how they found it. Were they, you know, were they very hands-on? Did they want to hear from you, or, you know, were they very hands-off? And also, a lot of grant funders will, through their websites, will give you a list of people who they've previously given grants to, and that's really useful to go through, because that's going to give you a great indication of the types of projects and the type of work that they are interested in funding, roughly like how much money they typically give. Yeah, so it'll just give you that really strong steer. And then the last thing that I know we talked about yesterday is just don't be afraid of contacting that funder in advance. If you're not sure, just give them a call. Some are sort of more contactable and willing to chat than others, but if you're in any way worried, and you can get in touch with them, just give them a call and say, this is what we're thinking about applying for, what do you think? And they obviously won't be able to say, yes, we'll give you that money straight away, definitely put that bid in, but they'll be happy that you're trying to sort of save their time and yours by being proactive and making that call. So yeah, that's the first slide. Okay, so really leading on from that, once you start actually putting together your bid. Yeah, if possible, read the entire application through first before you start answering the questions. We say if possible because quite often now funders are using online applications, and it's sometimes a little bit tricky because you have to click through, but it should be possible to sort of save the whole thing and then actually just see the whole form in its entirety. And what we quite often do is actually just copy and paste out the questions from those online application forms into a Word document so that you can see the whole thing. And that also really helps if you're sharing it between colleagues or you're getting other people to read it. So have a look at the entire application form first off, and then really compare that to the guidance that by now you will have read at least 3 times, and just really pull out in your mind or make notes what the key points are for you to get across in each question. And I mean, what I'd say around this, the whole process of writing your bid answers, is you have to remember that most bids will be scored. So they won't necessarily make their decisions on what sounds nicest, or how compelling the story is. They will probably have a points system, and so the people that are assessing your bid will actually need to kind of give you points for each question, and so the highest scoring answers will get the money basically. And yeah, so however nice your project sounds, if you haven't clearly answered the questions, they won't be able to give you maximum points for each question, and potentially you just won't score very highly. So it's really, really worth reading that question thoroughly, and that's why we're hammering home, like, read the guidance a lot. So go through and work out what you want the key points to get across for each question before you start writing them, and that basically gives you your structure for each of the questions as you take them in turn. And then you can go through and start writing, and at that point just be aware of any kind of potential for duplication. Almost all applications will have a word count, and so duplication basically just eats into your words. So yeah, be aware of that. And on word counts, stick to them. They're not well, sometimes people do have word guides, which I think is really nice and very friendly, but most of them have word counts, and I think what that means for a lot of funders is anything over that word count they just won't read. So don't think, oh well, it's only sort of 20 words over, because those last 20 words, if they're the most important, they're not going to count towards your application. So do be scrupulous and stick to the word count. Also, always thinking about the person that's reading it, and just assume that they know nothing about your organisation, and probably very little about your sector. So always avoid jargon and abbreviations. And abbreviations, I guess, particularly are quite tempting when you have tight word counts. So what I'd say is, if you're going to use abbreviations, just make sure that you do them in the kind of, in inverted commas, correct way, which is to use the full name for something first, and then follow that with the abbreviation in brackets, so that when you use that in later text, that's always been explained. So a really easy example for us is before Social Farms and Gardens was called Social Farms and Gardens, our full name was the Federation of City Farms and Community Gardens, which is lots of words and really long. So we always abbreviated that to FCFCG, but you would always need to give the full name first, and then put the abbreviation in brackets so that it's clear what you're talking about. So those are the sort of the key points in terms of like just answering the question. And then just more broadly, I think just remember that you are telling a story, and that it's really to get across that sort of compelling narrative within the word count. The things you need to be are concise, but also not shy away from having a bit of heart, and really making it not being afraid to say what you feel, and making it very clear why what you're asking for will be important, will have an impact. So I think that's just a balance to strike. Alison's going to go through the next couple of points.
Yeah, so it's just going to pick up on those last two there. Something that I found quite useful recently in particular is the using examples given as a checklist. So quite often you get the first one, tell us about your project, and then you look through the next few questions in the application form and you think, well, hang on, I've already told you that in that first one, and actually tell us about your project isn't a very clear question, because you don't know what they want to tell you about. So what they might say underneath that is some points. For example, you might want to tell us about your beneficiaries and who the project will impact. So use those as little bullet points through your question answer. And again, going back to what Sophie said earlier, if you read the entire application form first and highlighting the key points, then you can make sure that you're putting the right information in each question and not piling everything into the beginning or missing bits out or duplicating across multiple questions. And I think that's really important when you've got tight word counts, and like Sophie was saying there, where you've got a score sheet, you've got to make sure you have the right answer in the right question. So using those little examples that they have underneath as kind of subheadings on questions is really, really useful, and a lot more funders are starting to do that now, particularly if you look at, say, for example, the lottery emergency bids fund at the moment. That's got a really nice kind of little headings to help guide you through. So not only have you got the question, you've got then guidance through the question, so you've almost got each sentence set out because they are such tight word counts there. The other thing that I found really useful, which can be a bit scary, is asking someone to review what you've written and get them to be quite ruthless. So I do this for a youth organisation in the town where I live. So I know the organisation, but I don't know the ins and outs of what they're doing, or the, I guess, the kind of sector that they're working in particularly. So I can come at that with quite a kind of layman's approach, I suppose, really, and say, actually, I don't really know what you're talking about here, or you've drifted on. I see that you're really passionate about this, but this is completely irrelevant to this project here that you're talking about. And just allowing someone to be that kind of critical friend is really valid, and it does also help you to get rid of some of those words where, for example, sometimes you might internally, you know that as an organisation you can do something, but it's something you're maybe quite new at or you're not very confident about. And actually, someone from the outside doesn't know that you're not very confident about that. So we'll just say to you, look, don't say, we feel that we're quite good at doing this. Actually, to say, we're really good at doing this, or we've done this before. And having that confidence, one, cuts down your words massively, and two, puts you in much better stead in terms of how the funder's going to read that when they come to it, and seeing you as a confident organisation who does have experience and is able to deliver in what you're saying you can deliver there. So I'm going to pass back to Sophie. Moving on to evidencing now.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of agree with Alison basically in terms of like being confident in what you're talking about. I think, you know, often people are very modest about what they do, and it's a very strange thing to be going to somebody or an organisation and asking for money. So you tend to be, or I've tended to be, quite, you know, oh, if you wouldn't mind, and we think we'd do, you know, we think we'd be very good, and actually it really pays to be confident, like we are, you know, I mean, we'll come on to this, but you know, we are good at this, we know this, we are the experts in this, and this is why you should give us the money. Yeah, just say that. Okay, so I wanted to go over a little bit about using evidence in your bid, because I think this is a really useful way of just backing up what you're saying, and also giving you confidence in what you're asking for. Sources of evidence, we're going to go through a few different ones. So the first one that I wanted to highlight is using reports that have already been written by other funders. So you might be able to find a project, or you might hear about a project that was funded that's sort of similar to what you're looking to do. Now, some funders will make their reports public, or you might be able to find them, and that will then basically evidence, that will just explain what they did and why it was impactful. So the example that I want to use from that, I'm going to share my screen. Thank you. Is now, this is reasonably old now, the one that I want to share, and it's actually not online anymore. So yeah, I'll just say this now. If you find really good resources, I recommend downloading and sharing them, because you don't know how long they will be hosted online. So this report is, if I just scroll to the top so you can see it, this is the report into the local food programme, which was, so this was written in 2013, and this was a really big, I think it's sort of £65 million approximately, lottery programme into local food. So some of you may well have kind of worked on some of these programmes. And what they did was they commissioned what's called a social return on investment study on their entire programme. Now, a social return on investment study, it actually it stems from a government white paper. So it uses government methodology to try and put a financial cost on things that are socially good. So this hadn't really been done too much before, and I found this to be a really useful tool, because basically it takes us away from talking about some of the things that are done within the sort of community growing, gardening and farming sectors as just being nice, to actually being really effective and actually very good value for money. So what this methodology does is it puts a price tag on that. So and I like this local food report at any one general food growing. You can refer to them as evidence in your bid. So that's one. I'm just going to go on to the next one. Okay, I think I need to go. Sorry, everybody, this is a bit clunky. So the next kind of source of evidence that I wanted to go through is academic papers. Now, I've never worked in academia, and going through kind of academic papers can be really daunting, but there's some really great stuff that's done, and there's actually some ways that you can find kind of referenced academic texts without having to go through loads and loads of journals and things like that. So a really great resource is the Growing Health Programme, which is a piece of work that Sustain did several years ago. And this was all about evidencing the health and wellbeing benefits of food growing. So this is their website, and you can just go on that, and as you can see, there's a number of case studies. Cases are also a really good thing to refer to, because if you find a group who's done something similar, for example, I know that within these case studies, they've got a group that went into care homes and delivered growing activities with the care home residents. Obviously not something that you could do right now, but yeah, and they have evidence that that was really effective. So looking through these, but what there is also within here is a review of, so here, this overview of the evidence. And I've already opened this up, so if you can see, this is literally different gardening and food growing in settings. So this is that you're looking to apply for. Another source of kind of academic texts is going to be through Larger Rutland as a national organisation, a number of evidence, now a lot of it directly into the natural world, but you can go into their sort of publications section of their website, and they have this health and natural environment section, and you can see here got a number of publications that are talking about the health benefits of the natural world. I think Rachel's so farming team. So it's working through some general statistics. Now, some of this might seem a bit daunting, and it really will depend on the size of bid that you're looking to go for. If you're applying for a few £100 or £1,000, probably you don't need to start referencing academic texts. That's completely fine. But if you're going for a large amount of money, and I think at the moment, really bear in mind that with everything that's happening at the moment, funds are incredibly competitive. They were competitive already. They are even more competitive now. We're seeing funders having to close their funds altogether to new applications because they are so massively oversubscribed. So if there's the potential that a little bit of extra evidence might just give you an edge, I'd really say it's worth it. So organisations like Natural England, also there's some really good stuff through Mind. So I've just put this up here. Mind ran this big Eco Minds programme. Again, I think they've taken it down, but I can't find that overall report. But on their website, you can see summaries. It's really useful to refer to. Okay, the report that we wrote. So the report that I just wanted to highlight, sorry I couldn't show you that true value one, is another example of one that we host on the Social Farms and Gardens resources section. And I was part of this one, so I'm very happy to share it. And projects, reports that have already been published on a particular subject of what you're looking to do. So, for example, if you were looking to work with migrants, refugees, within the text, for migrants, so that's there. Resources that I wanted to share. So, Alison, you can have the screen back and put the presentation back up. There's a huge amount out there, so yeah, I'd really recommend just doing a bit of background reading, saving things, kind of highlighting the bits and pieces, and pulling out the facts as and when you think they're relevant. Okay, and then the other bit of data, I guess, that very currently we have available is, as I think Alison mentioned at the beginning, we have been running a survey into the effect of COVID-19 on the community growing sector as a whole, and have had a huge amount, I think about 266 responses so far. And so we've started publishing some initial kind of findings from that, and we will be publishing more. So we've just put up this quick infographic now, and that's available on our Facebook page, organisational Facebook page. So if you're applying to funders specifically for any kind of COVID-19 related relief or activity, and you think that the sort of data from the national sector would be useful, please do reference the figures that we're sort of putting together. Okay.
Thank you, Sophie. Oh, no. Right, just going to move this again. Sophie, I think you're actually going to pick up this page as well.
God, sorry. You
can have a cup of tea afterwards.
Me. Yeah, so we talked about using other people's evidence, and definitely do that, but using your own evidence is a brilliant way of showing funders that you know what you're talking about. So it's so much more powerful to say this is really good, and we know that because, than just it being this sort of open statement like we think this is great. Evidence kind of comes in two forms, so qualitative and quantitative data, and both are equally important. So qualitative is your kind of, it's people's feelings, it's what they think, it's their opinion. So it's not, you can't put qualitative data in a graph, but it really tells your story. So quotes or testimonials, and these, so use your kind of social media to get these. So quick ways, you know, it could just be like posts through your social media, like tell us what your favorite thing is about the garden, or specific feedback that you might have got from courses that you've run. Or you might want to do something like putting up a simple SurveyMonkey like consultation. So SurveyMonkey, you can, I think it's 10 questions that you can have for free. So you might want to ask some qualitative questions within that, that are just going to give you that kind of emotive, heartfelt response. And quantitative, so that is your statistics. So that might be, you know, simple yes no answers. So if you did do a SurveyMonkey, for example, asking sort of clear questions that have only a limited number of responses that you state through your answer options, rather than just asking people what to tell you what they think, you're giving them options. And what that means is that you can come out with some really good statistics, like this sort of 90% of volunteers report better mental well-being when participating in our sessions. So when you're putting together any kind of questionnaire or survey, really think about what you want that data to be used for. So what do you want to get out of that, beyond just we want to know what people think? Like, what are you actually going to use it for? So I would definitely try and go for a mix of quantitative and qualitative. That's fun to say, and that's going to give you the most sort of flexibility in the data that you get. And there will be lots of examples of surveys out there that do that. Coronavirus survey being one of them. So I mean, we ask a mixture of questions in that. So if you want to go back and have a look at that, please do. And again, like, reaching out through social media is a really good way of just getting people immediately. And I think at the moment, you know, people often have a little bit more time, so it's actually easier at the moment to kind of get evidence in that form from people whilst we're stuck at home. Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Sophie. Yeah, I guess I'm going to just reference here a little bit about how you then get that data into your bid if you're trying to stick to the word count and answer the question. And something I find quite useful is the burger approach. And I said to Sophie, I tried to find a picture of a burger, but they were all looking very meaty. So I didn't put one in here, so use a picture of us anyway in the corner. But the burger approach is basically, in each sentence that you're putting together, you're making your point, you're using evidence to back it up, and then you're finishing it off on the top by reaffirming your point and what that means. And all of this is aiming to get to a phrase that Heidi used yesterday, is why is your work important and what makes you the best organisation to deliver it? So for example, you say gardening improves people's lives, or improves people's mental well-being. 90% of volunteers participating in our activities report better mental well-being, using your statistics, your evidence. And then just finishing that off with saying we've been delivering gardening activities in our community for 20 years. So all of that is saying what's important, proving that it's important, and why you're the best people to do that. And if you can try and get that kind of little burger into each of your bits, then all of your answer should be a big high score or a big tick on each of the questions that funder has put in the first place. So if their question is, what is your project doing? You can give them a long spiel about how fantastic your project is, but so many other organisations can as well. I think that's really important to remember. Your organisation is probably fantastic, but so is so are so many other organisations. And so there's so many kind of causes that are really important as well. So it's important that you can not only prove or be passionate about how wonderful your thing is and how much you're investing in and your time and your effort and your ideas into your community and into the project you're doing, but you also need to demonstrate that it's needed and that you are the best people to deliver it in the way that funder has asked you to demonstrate that. And I think that's really important, because it can be really heartbreaking as well sometimes when you see organisations that you think maybe aren't quite so good for delivering a project but are really great at writing a bid, and they've been able to prove or demonstrate that they can do something and they get the funding, and you know that you could do better, so deliver something better. So hopefully, if these kind of tips, if you can really focus on that as well and get that kind of bid writing down to a T, then you can be enjoying that funding and just actually demonstrate that you are the best organisation to deliver that work that is very much needed. Okay.
On that, I would I just thought I'd add as well that it's worth thinking when you're setting up a project, and you might do this anyway as part of your setup, is how you will evidence how good that project is and has been. Now that might be part of the bid. They might be asking how are you going to validate and assess the impact. But even if the funders aren't, think about the work that you're doing and you're asking for funding now. In the future, you will probably want to refer back to that work for future funding bids. So think about how you're going to gather that evidence. If you're going to take photos, are you going to have permission to use those photos for other things? So it's worth having kind of photo permission forms, and just any kind of like feedback questionnaires, that kind of thing. Again, thinking through what you want from that data, because that evidence that you're gathering as part of this project that you're getting funding for right now, that could be evidencing your next funding bid.
Yeah. And that kind of goes back to the training or the webinar that Heidi and I ran yesterday around thinking about different types of funders. So also thinking about which types of funders you are looking to approach and what their priorities are, and therefore that will also influence what kind of evidence you want to collect. Right, so you've read your guidance, you know you're eligible, you've answered the question, you've included as much evidence as you can to demonstrate that you are the best, that your project is much needed and that you are the best organisation to be delivering that. And then it's time to collate your bids and submit it. And as Sophie alluded to earlier, this can be a final like 10 minutes before the deadline panic as you realise, oh no, I haven't got all of the things I needed. So I would absolutely recommend doing this as part of your reading the guidance at the beginning, is understanding all of these things. But when you come to do it, you may have missed something, so it's always really important to reread the guidance and the submission information before you actually press the go button. So check how to submit your bid. This is important to do in advance, as Sophie alluded to. I mean, Heidi and I posted a bid out a couple of weeks ago. There was no time frame on that, so it didn't matter if it had missed the post, but some of them are still requiring letters. And obviously then that's good if that's on headed paper. It might need a wet signature, so you might need to make sure you've got the right person available who can sign that. Obviously a lot of them are now online or an email form. Then checking who should submit the bid. A lot of them ask for someone who has the authority. So you may have fundraisers within your organisation or a volunteer who does your fundraising and your bids, but they might not be the person who's eligible to submit the bid, or you might need a signature from your chair of trustees who can sign that off before it's allowed to go off. So you do need to make sure that you've got time within your framework to do that and to get that. And then obviously also checking the when to submit the bid. Some of them have a 5 o'clock deadline, some of them have a 12 o'clock deadline, so don't get those confused. The next one's really important about attachments. So Sophie talked earlier about making sure that you've got the evidence that you need, like organisationally, and she's been talking quite a bit recently to one of the lottery funding officers, there we go, got there in the end, who's delivering the session for us tomorrow. And it's really, really important. These funders are getting so many applications for their time that and their money at the moment that are taking so much time to go through, that you have to provide everything as simply as possible. And you need to provide everything they ask for in the format that they ask for it, which can sometimes be a real pain and really awkward. So I had one the other day where I had to submit a bank statement and the annual report as one document, and I only had them as a PDF, so I couldn't merge them together. So that took quite a lot of time to try and work out how I could get both of those into one document, because I only had one place to upload them. One of the other things you quite often get asked for at the moment is safeguarding or vulnerable persons policy, so just making sure that you've got that. And then bank statements, again, making sure that they are the right date. So often they have to be from the last 3 months. And then again, like any governing documents or any deeds you have on any land might be needed. So just making sure that those documents are accessible and that they are in the right format to be able to be uploaded or to be attached If you're sending an email and it needs to have your accounts attached to it, some accounts are very, very large. So you might need to look at reducing the size of that before you send it. And if you are sending a lot of information via email, it's worth sending a receipt request so that you know that it's got there, and just gives you that little bit of peace of mind to know that it has got through the EFA, even though it's got a 13 megabyte set of annual report attached to it. Kind of following on from that, I think the last 2 points are not essential, but given the current circumstances, I would absolutely recommend. It's no point in going to all the effort of writing the bid and evidencing it if then the funders are just overwhelmed and just put you out the window because it's just too complicated, too confusing. So give all the attached documents relevant names. Often if you save a scanned document, it'll come up with the kind of SK344444001 as its file name, and that's not really much use for anyone who has no idea what this document is going to be. So save everything with your name and with what it is before you send it, so that it's really straightforward for that funding officer or the administrator, whoever's dealing with that, to go through and make sure that all of your bid always just looks really good. And then again, for yourselves, however you kind of organise all your information internally, it's really worthwhile saving that whole bid all together. So that's saving your accounts, saving the bids and any kind of previous iterations, any previous versions that you didn't, making sure you save the final one as final document, and any supporting information that you sent with that. Save all that so that you've got that ready for next time you maybe need to apply for that funder, or if you're applying to someone else for similar project. And if you've got all that in one place, it does make life so much easier for yourselves as well. And particularly if you've got changing personnel, or if you've got different people coming in and doing the bids, that can be really useful just to keep things consistent within your organisation. I was going to say one other thing on there, but it's slipped my mind at the moment, so we'll maybe come back to it.
I was just going to add that, yeah, in terms of sort of saving documents, absolutely, like if you're writing multiple bids, making sure that you have previous bids that you've written accessible also means that you can recycle them. So absolutely recycle as much of the effort that you've put into writing this bid as you can in future bids. And if you're working with multiple colleagues, trying to use things like Dropbox or any kind of cloud software, Google Docs, so that everybody has access to those documents that you're working on behalf of the group or organisation, just means that not only can you recycle that content, your colleagues can too.
And I think the other thing I was going to say there as well is often if you're submitting a bid online, you may not have a physical copy of it to save into that file, but what will often happen is when you submit it, they will send you a receipt which includes a copy of your application. So it's worth taking that off your email and attaching that into that folder as well. Just remembering that quite often once you click the button, you're like, I can breathe again, I'll just leave that now. But actually it's worth just following that up. And something we talked about yesterday is keeping a log of all the bids that you're putting in. Again, just for that consistency through the organisation and to support. So if someone comes in a year later, they can look back, oh, hang on, we applied for something before, I can go and find that information. And you can keep a record of what's been successful and what's been unsuccessful as well.
And then the other thing that might be requested, and I know that we haven't touched on, and that's just because we've covered it in a previous webinar, is often bids will ask to see a budget, a project budget, and a cash flow forecast. And they're really important supporting documents. So we're not going to go through them in this session, but we have already run a webinar with our finance manager, Angie, on putting together those kinds of documents. And that will be uploaded soon to our YouTube channel and hopefully our website, along with the pro forma document that she uses that you can use as well if you want to. So just to raise that is likely to be part of your bid, particularly if you're going for any sort of large-ish amounts of money. So that resource is there if you want a bit of support in putting those together as well, because they can be really daunting.
just got one final point on this, and I apologise for going backwards on myself slightly. But when you're before you submit your bid, check that you've answered everything. Particularly, I have a tendency when I'm doing online forms to get to the next page, you have to sometimes put something in the previous page, which might not necessarily be your final answer. It's just kind of a holding answer for yourself. So before you click submit, always go through and read the response that you've given to each question. Do that as your final go through, and make sure that you have answered the questions, and that there's no gaps within the actual application form itself. Right, our final top tips, and then we're nearly there.
Yeah.
Sophie, do you want to go through these?
I will do, yeah. So unsurprisingly, the first top tip is read the guidance. Now, what I would recommend is reading the guidance thoroughly, making yourself sit down and do it first. Refer back to it whilst you're answering your questions, and then actually read it again afterwards, to see and put yourself in their shoes. Think, am I what I'm putting across? Is this what they're looking to fund? So really keep that as like a current document that you're going back to again and again. And then the second thing to remember is, like, always answer the question. Be thinking about that sort of point scoring process. Basically, when you're reviewing what you've written, you need to imagine that you are a slippery politician or government advisor, let's say, that's being interviewed on TV, and you need to just constantly be thinking, but is this answering the question? Is this answering the question? You know, over and over. It doesn't matter how nice what you've written is. Does it, does it answer the question that they have asked in that application form? Absolutely. And then, yeah, can't talk. The third one, really following on from that, is, be really ruthless. So you will probably have to edit out some really good stuff that you've written in your bid, but it is really important to do that and be ruthless to ensure that you do completely stick to the point and you do completely answer the questions. So don't be afraid to maybe, I don't know, take a deep breath, delete loads of stuff and then save it as a different version so that you're not completely losing that content. But you might have to be quite ruthless, or even ask somebody else to do that. Alison, Heidi and I quite often work on bids, and we will, we've just got used to not taking offense when one of us cuts out half the other one's work. It's all in the process of ultimately having a really good bid, so it's worth doing that. Back up any claims that you can. So it's a little bit not dodgy, but it's difficult to make to have unsubstantiated claims within your text. So if you're going to say something, always try, and even if it's just fleetingly, refer to the evidence or why you know that particular thing. And then number 5, just think about it from your funder's point of view and make it easy for them. So, like Alison said earlier, if they've given you in the question, I don't know, bullet points of things that they want you to answer in bullet points, directly addressing those points in turn. Or if they've given you an example of things that they want to know, copy it. Just make it really easy, both through doing that, answering the question, then also making sure you've got all of your sort of files in order. So just think of it from their point of view, because from speaking to them, they are all sort of hard pushed at the moment and are getting completely inundated with bids. So the easier you can make your application for them to score absolutely top of the pile, the better.
Lovely. Right. Just finally, if you have any spare time and you want to read a report about funding, this is a little bit old, it's 10 years old now, but it's just all about making sure it's a report aimed at funders and fundraisers. So the idea of it was to try and address some of the ways that funders themselves were falling down by asking blurry questions or not making processes straightforward, but also to fundraisers, just to kind of stop us wasting our effort really on doing things that just aren't going to get anywhere. So it's only 4 pages. That's quite a nice report just to look through. that's all we've got to share with you today. So I don't know whether there's any questions that anyone wanted to raise while we're here. Don't worry if there aren't, but we're happy to answer questions. I'm aware that we are slightly over time now, so we won't be offended if there aren't anything there. Okay, I'll just tell you about a couple of other ways that you can keep in touch anyway. So we have, as we've alluded to today, we have got more micro webinars coming up, and tomorrow's is with Heidi Hatzeldine. Yeah, got it right finally, from the lottery, and she's looking at their new funds launch. It's been really highly applied for, but she's going to be just taking through some of the guidance there to help people making the best of their time to apply for that fund, which is very relevant to a lot of our members' organisations. Monday the 1st of June, we're having more of an open discussion, talking about the future of community farming and growing, and kind of looking at what might be next. So we're really excited that Chris, our director, and Paul, our chair of trustees, and Kate Swade from Shared Assets will be sharing their thoughts on there, but it will be very much an open place for people to ask questions and share ideas. And then also one of our projects at Social Farms and Gardens, the Growing Care Farming project, is also running a number of webinars, so it's worth keeping an eye on the website for them. The next one is next Thursday, all around IT and data protection solutions, specifically for care farmers, but I would suggest that if anyone's in a slightly different situation and has concerns about IT and data, a lot of the information there will be relevant to community growers and allotments and city farms as well. Okay, and then finally, maybe if you come up with a question in a little bit, there's a space now to ask those questions of experts in the sector. So we've relaunched our Social Farms and Gardens group, which is a private group on Facebook, where you can share your ideas, share your challenges, ask questions, and it's just a supportive arena for some peer networking, essentially, particularly at this time where we can't be having our face-to-face training sessions. We're really aware that peer networking is so important in our sector, and that is the space for that now. If you have any issues kind of accessing that group or anything, just give one of us a shout or email admin@farmgarden.org.uk, and they'll be able to signpost you. Obviously, following this, we will send out the slides and links to some of the resources. If there's anything else you need, do get in touch, probably with Sophie's your best bet this week. And yeah, thank you ever so much for joining us, and thank you for all you've contributed there, Sophie. Was there anything else that you wanted to say just before we?
No, I think I've talked quite enough for everybody. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining us. And yeah, I think the session tomorrow with the lottery will be really interesting. So I hope some of you can join that. And as we said at the top, we have been recording this session, and we will be recording the one tomorrow. So you will be able to catch up on those.
Paola's just raised her hand. Are you able to write a Q&A? Oh, in the chat, maybe? No.
Yeah, I've not seen a question come through. Okay. If there is, yeah, if there's something you want to add, then we can. Do you want to get in touch with us subsequently?
Yeah.
You'll have my email address from sending out the links and stuff like that. Okay.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.